Hello again. Greetings again from Madrid, Spain. We're in our third week of lockdown here, and we're doing fine, safe and sound, but we are anxiously waiting for the day that we can get back to normal lives. And no doubt you are, wherever you are hoping for the same thing. In the last message, I talked about God's presence. Our story is from Acts 27. Paul is on a ship to Rome. They have left Crete, and things start out very fine for them, but then they don't get very far at all. This huge wind came down from the northeast, and they had 2 weeks of solid darkness and storm. And the 276 passengers on board were scared for their lives. Paul receives a visit from an angel of the Lord reassuring him that it's God's will for him to go to Rome to testify before Caesar, and that Paul and all the other people on board of the ship will be spared their lives, although the ship did end up shipwrecked. And then we reach the part where the ship's crew sensed that they were getting close to land. They sent down measures to anchor, to measure the depth of the sea, and they realized that they needed to throw out 4 anchors. And it's that basis on the message for this series is on the 4 different anchors. The first anchor that we talked about in the last message was God's presence, and that God's presence was such an important factor to Paul, not only at that time and other times of his ministry, when either Jesus or an angel from God came to visit him to reassure him, to give him peace. And the next anchor that we want to talk about tonight is the anchor of God's peace. Directly related, because God's presence always brings peace. I want to read a passage again from our text here, Acts 27. Start with verse 33. And again, this is Lucas writing in the first person because he is on board. And he says, just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. After this, he said, and he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. And then he broke it and began to eat. And they were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of us on board. And when they had eaten as much as they had wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea. So we see that God's presence led to God's peace. They go hand in hand. God's presence always results in peace for his people. And I can imagine if I were on board, if you were on board of that ship with Paul, that thinking that, wow, this is going to be our last trip, 14 days of no food, of no daylight, and you're just saying, okay, this is it. And that to hear these words, and Paul reassured him, all of them, about that they were going to survive and that they could eat. And Paul had this assurance to tell them to eat all that they would want to, and then to replenish their strength. I love to hear stories of conversion stories of how other people came to Christ, and one of my favorite ones, you may have heard this yourself, but it's a story of John Wesley. Wesley and his brother Charles Wesley were sent out from the Anglican Church as missionaries to North America, to the colonies. And in 1735, they were crossing the Atlantic in a ship to take the gospel to the Native American people. During the voyage, the ship was struck by a terrific storm, and John Wesley was afraid for his life. He prayed with all the English passengers, one of whom brought him a baby to baptize in case they were all about to die. And shortly afterwards, he was at another service with a group of German Moravians when a huge wave engulfed the ship and water poured down into the cabins. Now, if you never heard of the Moravians before, these were a fantastic group of mainly from Germany, but were born-again believers who had found life in Jesus and found peace, and they were all on this ship as well. If you've never read or anything about the Moravians, you need to. You can look it up, find some great articles on the internet or books about the Moravians, the huge missionary movement that the Moravians. And so, anyway, so Wesley was greatly impacted. While the English passengers screamed in terror, the Moravian group continued to sing praises, and men and women and children were praying and seemingly untroubled from what was going around. And later Wesley asked one of the Moravians if they hadn't been afraid. He replied that not even women and children had been afraid. None of them were afraid to die. And obviously Wesley was. John Wesley knew that they had something that he didn't have, an absolute trust in God. They were prepared to lose their lives because they knew that God was never going to let them go. Wesley was deeply impressed. His time in America was largely unsuccessful in many ways, and after 2 years, he and Charles returned home to England. And all that time, Wesley was nagged by the thought that he did not have full faith in God. At one time in his journal, he wrote, "I have preached the gospel to the Native Americans to convert their soul, but who will convert my soul? Who will preach the gospel to me?" Wesley was an example that it's possible to have religion and not a relationship. But story will tell us, and this is reserved for another time, that Wesley, after going back to England, within a short period of time, again, when visiting a Moravian meeting in London, a place called Aldersgate, that his life would change and peace would fill his heart, that he would be born again and come to faith in Christ. Again, it's a fantastic story of just how peace, how God's presence in our lives will result in peace. That doesn't mean that life is a rose garden, far from it. Far from it. And if anything, the COVID-19 is exposing us to this, that, wow, life is not going as we thought it would. The stock market has crashed. Schools are shut down. Many have lost jobs. And if you're like us here in lockdown, we can't even go outside and walk around the block unless it's to buy groceries or something. Life has changed. But I'm reminded of what Jesus said in John 16:33. He said, "I have these things to say to you. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world." I love another version that says, "But be of good cheer, because I have overcome the world." Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulation. The Christian life is not a garden of roses. It's not this pie in the sky. You're never going to get sick. You're always going to have everything that you want to have, and all this stuff that sometimes we hear. No, far from it. Far from it. But Jesus, in the midst of the tribulations, can say, remember me, trust in me, take heart. In John 14:27, he said, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, but the peace I give is different. Let your hearts not be troubled. Let them not be afraid." As we think about this second anchor of faith, of peace, do we have peace? Where is your peace in these days? And if you don't have peace, why? Someone once very accurately said, "Know Jesus. You'll know peace." Know Jesus, no peace. My prayer for us in these days that we will remember this very important second anchor, the anchor of God's peace, that will change things in the midst of trials, in the midst of difficult times. We can't understand what's going around us, but we have this deep inner sense that these Moravians had on that ship back in 1735. They had that peace that passes all understanding, the peace that they knew that if the ship goes down, guess what? They're going up. They're going up to heaven because that's their citizenship. Well, where's our citizenship? And that citizenship, if it's in heaven, should bring us peace. Thank you, and may God bless you.